Mr. Cooper, you'll lead this round off. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Noseworthy, you were ISED's eyes and ears at the SDTC board, attending each and every board meeting in which there were 186 conflicts of interest involving board members. The Auditor General identified 90 instances in which the conflict of interest policy was not complied with. There were multiple real conflicts of interest, including tens of millions of dollars that were funneled from SDTC to companies in which board members had interests. And your excuse for supposedly saying nothing, doing nothing, and reporting nothing back is that you had no independent way of assessing conflicts of interest. Really? How can you assert that when the evidence was right in front of you?
The fiduciary responsibility on conflict of interest rests with the member of the board. It is the responsibility of the
Mr. Noseworthy, you made the statement that you had no independent way of assessing conflicts of interest, and I put it to you that that is false. The evidence was right in front of you, wasn't it? Because, Mr. Noseworthy, this committee has heard plenty of evidence about the fact that weeks before each board meeting, an agenda was sent out. Board members were invited to identify which projects they had conflicts of interest in, and at the beginning of the meeting, the secretary would read out which projects involving which directors conflicts of interest existed. So again, the evidence was right in front of you. And you said nothing, you did nothing, you covered it up. Is that what you're saying?
Mr. Chair, I only saw the materials that were circulated for.
Yeah, and the materials provided, certain members had conflicts of interest. And it was said at the beginning of the meeting. So what are you talking about that you had no independent way of assessing? You're just making it up.
They declared it.
You're making it up to cover your butt.
Mr. Chair, when people declared conflict of interest and it was raised at the beginning of the meeting, my experience was that they recused themselves and they were not part of the discussion on the project.
So they left the room. Did they leave the room? Because recusing oneself is not sufficient, but even if they did leave the room, that's not acceptable either, is it? Because Section 12 of the SDTC Act states very clearly that no director shall profit or gain any income or acquire any property from the foundation or its activities. One such board member, the good friend of the Environment Minister, Andre Lise-Matteau, admitted before this committee that $10.4 million was funneled from SDTC into companies that she had interest in. That is a complete violation of the SDTC Act. Yes, she declared the conflict. Yes, she left the room. You were at each of those meetings. Why didn't you report these blatant violations of the SDTC Act? You were aware of the Act. You admitted you were aware of the Act. Why didn't you report $10.4 million funneled into her companies improperly and illegally?
Mr. Chair, my experience again, sorry, there seems to have been some feedback. Mr. Chair, my experience was that people recused themselves, and my assumption was by recusing themselves and following normal board procedures, they would have been in compliance with the
What part of Section 12.2, no director shall profit or gain any income or acquire any property, do you not understand?
I am not a lawyer, sir, and Mr. Chair, I believe that clause needs to be read in reflection on what the
$10.4 million going into companies that Andre Lise-Matteau had interest in.
Mr. Cooper, I have a point of order. Yes, Ms. Khalid.
Chair, we've spent a lot of months and years trying to make sure that our interpreters are well taken care of. We don't need to yell that loudly when we're talking into a microphone, because I do believe that it is hurting their ears. So, Chair, if you can, if you can please.
Thank you. All right, I was hearing Miss Khalid. It's all right, Mr. Durain. I appreciate your concern. It's one I share. Mr. Cooper, you have about 40 seconds left, and I would urge you just to be aware of the interpreters. I see where you're going, and I know that committee members share your concerns, but if you could just keep that in mind, you have 40 seconds, please.
Well, Mr. Noseworthy, what were you doing at each of these meetings? Eating chicken fingers? I mean, what were you doing?
Mr. Chair, as I've now indicated multiple times, I saw my role there as around policy coordination and providing board members with advice that they might find useful in policy coordination and ultimately making decisions around the organization.
Thank you very much. 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
2 minutes, 30 seconds, Madame Sinclair de Gagné. Mr. Noseworthy, did you read the Auditor General's report? Yeah.
Rapport au paragraphe 60.
In paragraph 63 says that we noted that the ISDE made a report of its concerns about the Foundation with respect to the first project involving the ecosystem. Are you aware of the fact, do you know if you or yourself indicated this to the Board of Directors?
We discussed that matter, Mr. Chair, at the operational level with the CEO. I believe I discussed it directly with the CEO. There were a number of occasions over my time with ISED where we raised specific concerns about projects or initiatives that SDTC was seeking to undertake. In that particular case, we wondered about the eligibility of the project under the contribution agreement. My memory of the situation, and I'm sorry I don't have this information in front of me, is that they came back to us and satisfied our initial concerns, and I believe we agreed to allow the program to proceed on a pilot basis with the expectation we would review it in more detail later.
À ma question précédente, vous avez
To my
répondu.
previous question, you didn't think you had a role of policing. But you said, or you mentioned that there were problems in terms of non-compliance on the board of SDTC with respect to the contribution agreements. Why did you report for the ecosystem but not for other instances where you had concerns?
The concerns that we raised as a department were raised at the officials level as materials were being developed on project-specific decisions. And with the exception of, well, actually, I think in all cases, they were resolved and did not warrant discussion at the board level. And indeed, I did not see it my role even at the board level to raise those concerns. I recall in the case of the particular project you mentioned, the chair, sorry, not the chair, the CEO, did indicate to the board members that there had been a discussion with ISED and we were working out issues around eligibility.
Plusieurs des projets du volet écosystème étaient.
Several of the projects of the ecosystems flew in the face of the entire contribution agreements, and in fact, they were not eligible. So, how did you direct your concern? Was the deputy minister involved, or was it Mr. Kennedy?
We raised our concerns about potential eligibility of the projects directly with SDTC. They provided.
Monsieur Noseworthy, je vous demande, quand vous dites oui, c'est qui?
Noseworthy, who is we? I'm so sorry. We'll go back to your questions later.